The guest room holds shadows like secrets, each corner thick with the kind of darkness that makes you forget what time you went to bed, what day it is, what version of yourself you were trying to be before you ended up here. 2:38 in the morning, according to the red numbers glowing from the nightstand, and I am lying perfectly still, staring at the ceiling where streetlight filters through thin curtains, casting everything in muted amber. The walls are painted a neutral beige that looks gray in this light, and there's a small water stain near the window that I've been studying for the past hour, tracing its irregular edges with my eyes like a map to nowhere. The sheets beneath me are wrinkled from hours of restless shifting, cotton that once felt soft now bunched and twisted around my legs. Beside me, Julian breathes in the slow rhythm of someone who has finally found peace, each exhale a whispered reminder that one of us, at least, is not at war with himself. I should be asleep. I should be home in my own bed, next to Clara, listening to her familiar breathing, her small sounds of contentment. I should be a lot of things I'm not. Instead, I'm here in this narrow bed that wasn't meant for two grown men, hyper-aware of every inch of space between our bodies. 6 inches, maybe 7. It might as well be an ocean. It might as well be nothing at all. The mattress dips slightly toward the center, a gravitational pull I'm fighting with every rigid muscle in my back. Julian had laughed earlier when I offered to take the couch. He said the guest bed was big enough for both of us, that we weren't teenagers anymore, that it didn't have to be weird. He said he doesn't cuddle anyway, never has, not his thing. He said it with that easy confidence that has always made me both envious and unsettled, like he knows exactly who he is while I'm still figuring out the basic architecture of myself. The heater kicks on with a soft mechanical whisper, and Julian stirs. I close my eyes and try to match his breathing, try to disappear into the illusion of sleep. But my heart is drumming against my ribs, and I'm certain the sound must be echoing through the mattress, betraying every anxious thought I'm desperately trying to suppress. This is what friendship looks like, I tell myself. 2 old friends, practical adults, sharing a bed out of convenience. Nothing more complicated than that. Nothing that threatens the careful structure I've built around my life, around my marriage, around the version of myself I've presented to the world for 38 years. But then Julian turns. Not the small, unconscious adjustment of someone deep in sleep, but the deliberate movement of someone who has been awake, someone who has been thinking. I feel it in the way the mattress shifts, the way the air between us seems to compress and expand. The movement is slow, careful, like he's testing the boundaries of something neither of us has named. His breathing changes slightly, becomes more conscious, and I wonder if he can hear my heart hammering against my ribs, if the sound is as deafening to him as it is to me. The mattress shifts again, and suddenly the careful distance between us collapses. His arm moves across my waist with the kind of gentle certainty that suggests he's been planning this moment, waiting for it, maybe hoping for it. Not tentative, not accidental, but deliberate in a way that makes my chest tighten with panic and something else, something I've been fighting for longer than I want to admit. The weight of his arm settles against my ribs like a question I don't know how to answer, like a key turning in a lock I thought I had thrown away. I freeze. Every muscle in my body turns to stone, and my breath catches somewhere between my throat and my chest. The simple warmth of his forearm pressed against the thin cotton of my t-shirt sends something electric racing beneath my skin, something I haven't felt in years, something I thought I had successfully buried under mortgage payments and parent-teacher conferences and 20 years of marriage to a woman who deserves so much better than the half-truth I've been living. The sensation spreads outward from where his arm rests, a slow burn that reaches my fingertips, my toes, the base of my skull. I want to move. I want to stay perfectly still forever. I want to turn toward him, and I want to run from this room and never look back. The contradictions war inside me, leaving me paralyzed in the amber darkness, afraid that even the slightest movement will shatter whatever fragile thing is happening between us. Julian's breathing remains steady, unchanged, as if this gesture means nothing to him, as if the contradiction between his earlier words and this moment isn't tearing open something fundamental in the carefully ordered universe I've constructed. As if he doesn't understand that this simple touch is rewriting the story I've been telling myself about who I am, about what I want, about the door I thought I had locked forever and buried the key to somewhere so deep I would never have to face what was behind it. His fingers curl slightly against my side, a barely perceptible movement that might be unconscious but feels like the most intentional thing in the world. The pressure is gentle but unmistakably there, real in a way that makes the rest of my life feel like something I've been performing rather than living. But his arm stays there, warm and solid and impossibly real against my waist, and I know with the terrible clarity that only comes at 2:38 in the morning that everything is about to change. That maybe it already has. That maybe it changed years ago, and I've just been too afraid to admit it. The room grows smaller around us, the shadows deeper, and I lie perfectly still in the darkness, feeling the weight of his touch and the weight of everything it means, everything it threatens, everything it promises. My carefully ordered life stretches out behind me like a photograph I'm suddenly seeing from the wrong angle, and ahead of me lies nothing but uncertainty and the terrifying possibility of truth. The morning after arrives with the mechanical precision of my alarm clock, 6:15 sharp, same as every weekday for the past 15 years. I wake in my own bed, in my own house, Clara's arm flung across the pillow where my chest should have been. The guest room feels like something I dreamed, except for the way my ribs still hold the memory of weight, of warmth, of a question I still can't answer. I slip out of bed without disturbing her and pad barefoot to the kitchen, where everything is exactly as I left it. Coffee maker programmed the night before, lunch already packed in the refrigerator, car keys hanging on their designated hook by the garage door. This is the architecture of my life, built on routine and reliability, every beam and foundation stone placed with deliberate care. Our house sits on Maple Street in a neighborhood where the lawns are edged with mathematical precision and the mailboxes all face the same direction. It's a good house, a sensible house, with 3 bedrooms and 2.5 baths and a mortgage that will be paid off when I'm 58. The living room holds 20 years of accumulated happiness, framed wedding photos arranged on the mantel, school pictures of Emma and David marking time in careful progression from gap-toothed kindergarten smiles to the complex expressions of teenagers still figuring out who they want to become. I teach American history at Lincoln High School, 3rd period through 7th, 5 days a week, 9 months a year. My classroom is room 237, and I've been there long enough that the desk feels molded to my particular shape. The students call me Mr. Carson, and I've earned a reputation for being fair but demanding, the kind of teacher who remembers names and notices when someone is struggling. I love the work mostly. There's something satisfying about watching 17-year-olds discover that the past isn't just dates and names, but real people making impossible choices, living with consequences, trying to figure out how to be human in circumstances they never could have imagined. But lately, standing in front of the whiteboard, talking about the Revolutionary War or the Great Depression, I feel like I'm performing a version of myself, reading lines from a script I memorized so long ago I've forgotten there might be other ways to say the words. Clara notices, of course. She's always been better at reading the subtle weather of our marriage than I am. Over dinner last Tuesday, she mentioned that I seemed distant lately, distracted. She asked if everything was okay at work, if I was feeling well, if there was something I wanted to talk about. I told her I was fine, just tired, maybe coming down with something. The lie tasted familiar in my mouth, comfortable as an old sweater. The truth is more complicated. The truth is that Julian moved back to town 6 weeks ago, and everything I thought I knew about the shape of my contentment has been slowly shifting off its axis. I hadn't seen him in 3 years, not since his mother's funeral, where we stood together in the back of the church and shared the kind of silence that feels more intimate than conversation. Before that, it had been even longer, our friendship reduced to Christmas cards and the occasional email about nothing in particular. Life had pulled us in different directions after college, the way it does. He went to Chicago, then Portland, chasing jobs and relationships, and some version of himself he could never quite catch. I stayed here, got married, bought the house, became the kind of man who coaches Little League and serves on the school board. But when Julian called 6 weeks ago to say he was moving back, that his divorce was final and he needed a fresh start, something in my chest loosened like a knot I hadn't realized was there. He sounded older on the phone, more careful with his words, but underneath was the same voice that had talked me through calculus homework and late-night existential crises 20 years ago. We met for coffee on a Thursday afternoon, awkward at first, like actors who'd forgotten their blocking. He looked good, older but good, gray threading through his dark hair, lines around his eyes that spoke of laughter and disappointment in equal measure. We talked about safe things at first, his job prospects, my teaching, the way the town had changed and hadn't changed since we left for college all those years ago. But then he smiled, really smiled. And it was 1995 again, both of us 20 and convinced we could solve all the world's problems if we just stayed up late enough, talked long enough, understood each other completely enough. We used to spend entire nights in the library or his dorm room, books scattered around us like fallen leaves, conversations that meandered through philosophy and literature and the impossible question of what we were supposed to do with our lives. There had been something electric in those moments, something that felt larger than friendship but smaller than whatever I was afraid it might be. Julian would laugh at something I said, that low chuckle that seemed to start in his chest and work its way up through his throat, and I would feel something flutter in my stomach that I told myself was just the thrill of being understood, of having found someone who could keep up with the strange rhythms of my thoughts. Now, sitting across from him in the coffee shop, I felt that same flutter, deeper and more dangerous after 20 years of trying to forget it existed. When he reached across the table to steal one of my sugar packets, his fingers brushed mine for just a moment, and the contact sent something shooting up my arm that had nothing to do with static electricity and everything to do with the way time collapses when you're face to face with a truth you thought you'd successfully outgrown. That was 6 weeks ago. Since then, we've fallen back into an easy rhythm, like musicians remembering a song they used to play. Coffee every Thursday, the occasional beer after I finish grading papers, conversations that pick up threads we dropped 2 decades ago, as if no time has passed at all. And now this. Now last night, and his arm across my waist, and the terrible clarity that some things don't fade no matter how carefully you bury them. Some things just wait, patient as buried seeds, for the right conditions to finally grow. The call comes on a Saturday morning while I'm grading essays about the Industrial Revolution, red pen bleeding across pages of teenage insight and confusion. Julian's voice carries that particular blend of sheepishness and hope that I remember from college, when he needed help with something but didn't want to admit it. He found an apartment, he says. Nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom place above the bookstore on Main Street. But it's his, and he can afford it, and would I maybe have some time to help him move? The truck rental place has a special on weekend rates, and he figures between the two of us we can get everything done in a day, maybe 2 at most. I say yes before I've fully considered what I'm agreeing to. Clara looks up from her crossword puzzle, raises an eyebrow in question. I cover the phone and tell her Julian needs help moving. She nods, goes back to 7 across, something about betrayal in 6 letters. The word hovers in the air between us, though she doesn't know it yet. The apartment is smaller than I expected, tucked above Murphy's used books with narrow stairs that creak under the weight of Julian's life packed into cardboard boxes. The space smells like old paper and coffee, sunlight streaming through tall windows that face the street below. It's the kind of place a younger version of myself might have fantasized about, bohemian and slightly impractical. Nothing like the suburban certainty I chose instead. Julian stands in the center of the empty living room, hands on his hips, surveying the possibilities. There's something vulnerable about him here, surrounded by boxes marked kitchen and books and miscellaneous in his careful handwriting. This is what starting over looks like, I realize. This is what it means to unpack a life that didn't turn out the way you planned. We work in comfortable silence mostly, the rhythm of lifting and carrying and arranging creating its own conversation. I learned things about him I never knew. small revelations hidden in the archaeology of his possessions. He owns more books than should fit in any reasonable apartment. He has a collection of vinyl records that spans 3 decades, everything from Miles Davis to Radiohead, organized with the kind of obsessive care that speaks to deeper hungers. There's a framed photograph of his parents from their anniversary party, both of them laughing at something just outside the camera's range. By evening, the basic architecture is in place. Couch positioned to catch the afternoon light, bookshelves arranged along the longest wall, kitchen boxes unpacked enough that we can find glasses and something to drink. Julian produces a bottle of wine, something red and expensive-looking, leftover from his marriage, he says with a wry smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. The sun sets while we work on the living room, arranging furniture, debating whether the reading chair belongs by the window or facing the room. Julian puts on music, an album I remember from college, all saxophone and subtle percussion. The sound fills the space between us, familiar and strange at the same time, like hearing your own voice played back from a recording made years ago. This is when the evenings begin to stretch. What starts as practical help becomes something else, harder to name. We finish the wine and open another bottle. Julian sits on the floor, back against the couch, sorting through a box of CDs, and I find myself watching the way his hands move, careful and deliberate, the same way he used to handle books when we studied together. He holds up albums and asks if I remember this one, this song, this particular night when we stayed up until dawn arguing about the meaning of everything. I remember more than I should. I remember the way he looked at 22, intense and searching, convinced that if we could just understand enough, feel deeply enough, we could crack open the secret of how to live. I remember the night he played me an entire album, track by track, explaining why each song mattered, his face animated in the lamplight, and how I watched his mouth move around the words and wondered what it would feel like to interrupt him with a kiss. The thought comes back now, 20 years later, unwelcome and undeniable. He's telling me about a concert he went to in Portland, some band I've never heard of, and I'm not really listening because I'm cataloging the way time has changed him and left him exactly the same. The lines around his eyes are deeper now, and there's gray in his hair that wasn't there in college. But when he laughs, really laughs, it still starts in his chest and works its way up through his throat, and I still feel something flutter in my stomach that has nothing to do with the wine. The evening dissolves into night without either of us noticing. We move through his record collection like archaeologists, each album a small excavation of shared history. He puts on something slow and melancholy, something with piano and a voice that aches around the edges, and we sink deeper into the couch, the space between us shrinking as the night grows later, and the wine makes everything feel softer, more possible. This is how it starts, really, not with the moment in the guest room, but here, in this collection of small intimacies that feel innocent enough individually, but add up to something I can't pretend not to recognize. The way Julian's hand brushes mine when he passes me a glass. The way he leans closer when he wants to make a point, close enough that I can smell his aftershave, something clean and unfamiliar that makes me want to breathe deeper. The way he looks at me when he thinks I'm not looking, like he's trying to solve a puzzle he's been working on for 20 years. I should leave. I should say something about getting home to Clara, about the late hour, about responsibilities and boundaries, and all the sensible reasons why this feels dangerous. Instead, I hear myself asking if he has any coffee, if he minds if I stay a while longer. The question hangs in the air between us, innocent on the surface, loaded with implications neither of us is quite ready to name. Julian smiles, that slow smile I remember from college, and says he was hoping I'd ask. He disappears into the kitchen, and I sit alone in his living room, surrounded by the evidence of his new life, listening to the soft sounds of him moving around in the next room, and I know with the terrible clarity that only comes late at night that I'm already falling towards something I can't catch, something that will require me to become a different person than the one I've been for the past 20 years. The nights begin to multiply, each one feeling necessary and impossible at the same time. What started as helping Julian settle into his apartment becomes something I can't quite name, a gravitational pull that draws me back to that small space above the bookstore with increasing frequency. I tell Clara I'm helping him get established, that he's having trouble adjusting after the divorce, that it's what old friends do for each other. All of this is true, but not the whole truth, and the space between what I say and what I feel grows wider each week. Tuesday evenings become our unofficial tradition. I grade papers while Julian cooks, something simple but better than anything I make at home. He moves around the narrow kitchen with easy confidence, chopping vegetables, tasting sauces, talking about books he's reading or articles he's found online. The apartment has settled into itself now, records organized, books shelved, photographs placed on surfaces that make it feel like a home rather than a temporary arrangement. Sometimes I catch myself studying these details, memorizing the particular way afternoon light falls across his reading chair, the sound his coffee mug makes when he sets it on the wooden table, the way he hums unconsciously when he's concentrating on something. The conversations flow differently here than they do anywhere else in my life. At home, Clara and I discuss schedules and household logistics, the children's activities, plans for weekend errands. Necessary conversations, practical and efficient, but they skim along the surface of things. With Julian, we dive deeper without meaning to, talking about ideas that don't have immediate applications, books that made us think differently, the strange ways memory works to preserve some moments with perfect clarity while others fade like watercolors left in the sun. He has a small balcony that overlooks Main Street, barely wide enough for 2 folding chairs and a potted plant that he's somehow managed not to kill. We sit there after dinner, drinking beer from bottles that sweat in the evening heat, watching the town settle into its nighttime rhythms. The hardware store closes at 8, Mr. Patterson locking up with the same careful attention he's shown for 30 years. The teenagers gather by the coffee shop, their voices floating up to us in fragments of laughter and dramatic declarations about love and unfairness and the impossible complexity of being 17. This is when Julian is most himself, relaxed and unguarded, his feet propped on the balcony railing, talking about whatever comes to mind. Sometimes he tells me stories from his marriage, not bitter exactly, but tinged with the particular sadness that comes from recognizing how 2 people can love each other and still fail to make a life together. Sometimes he talks about jobs he's thinking of applying for, the strange adventure of starting over at 40. Sometimes we just sit in comfortable silence, and I find myself studying the profile of his face in the streetlight, the way his hair curls slightly at the nape of his neck, the unconscious grace of his hands when he gestures while he talks. These are dangerous thoughts, and I know it. I'm married to a woman who deserves better than a husband who spends his evenings cataloging another man's beauty, who comes home with the scent of someone else's cooking still lingering on his clothes. But sitting on Julian's balcony, watching the evening deepen around us, I feel more like myself than I have in years. Not the careful, responsible version of myself that I perform at home and at school, but some truer self I thought I'd lost somewhere along the way. The transformation is subtle at first, noticeable only in small shifts that might be explained away. I find myself looking forward to Tuesday evenings with an intensity that feels disproportionate. I catch myself thinking about things Julian said while I'm teaching, his voice echoing in my head during faculty meetings, his laugh interrupting my concentration while I help Emma with her algebra homework. Clara mentions that I seem distracted, and I tell her I'm just tired, that grading papers is wearing me down more than usual this semester. But it's more than distraction. I'm living split between 2 versions of myself, and the effort of maintaining both is exhausting. At home, I perform the role of husband and father with increasing consciousness of its artificiality. I ask Clara about her day and listen to her responses, but part of my mind is already drifting toward evening, toward the possibility of another conversation with Julian, another hour spent in that small apartment where I feel like the person I'm supposed to be. The physical awareness becomes harder to ignore. Julian is tactile in ways I'd forgotten, or maybe never fully noticed when we were younger. He touches people when he talks, a hand on the shoulder to emphasize a point, fingers brushing when he passes you something. With me, these moments of contact begin to carry weight they shouldn't. When he reaches across the dinner table to steal a French fry from my plate, his wrist brushes against mine, and the contact sends something electric up my arm that has nothing to do with static and everything to do with longing I've spent 20 years trying to forget existed. I start to notice everything. The way his laugh starts deep in his chest before it reaches his throat. The way he runs his hand through his hair when he's thinking. The way he looks at me sometimes, like he's seeing something I'm not aware I'm showing. These observations feel dangerous, like evidence of something I'm not supposed to want, but I can't stop collecting them, storing them away like a miser hoarding coins against some future catastrophe. The Tuesday evenings stretch later and later. What starts as dinner becomes dinner and drinks, then dinner and drinks and long conversations that meander through books and politics and the impossible question of what we're supposed to do with the time we've been given. Sometimes Julian puts on music, albums from college that unlock memories I'd forgotten I had, and we sink deeper into his couch, the space between us shrinking as the night grows later and our defenses grow thinner. It's during one of these evenings that Julian falls asleep first, his head tipped back against the couch cushions, mouth slightly open, looking younger and more vulnerable than he does when he's awake. I should leave. I should gather my things quietly and drive home to my own bed, my own life, my own carefully constructed version of contentment. Instead, I sit watching him sleep, memorizing the particular way his chest rises and falls, the way his hair falls across his forehead, the expression of absolute peace that settles over his features when he's unconscious. This is when I know I'm in trouble. This is when I realize that what I'm feeling has moved beyond the boundaries of friendship into territory I don't know how to navigate. I cover him with a blanket and let myself out quietly, but I can't escape the terrible clarity that comes with admitting you want something you can't have, something that would require you to dismantle the entire architecture of your life to pursue. At home, Clara is already asleep, curled on her side of the bed with the book she was reading still open beside her. I undress in the dark, careful not to wake her, and slip under covers that feel suddenly foreign, like I'm climbing into someone else's life. But even here, in my own bedroom beside my wife of 20 years, I can't stop thinking about Julian's apartment, about the way the streetlight filtered through his windows, about the weight of the silence when he fell asleep on his couch while I watched and wanted and hated myself for wanting. It happens on a Thursday night in October, when the first real cold snap has settled over the town and Julian's apartment feels like a warm cave carved out of the larger darkness. I arrive later than usual, delayed by a parent conference that stretched longer than expected, some concerned mother wanting to understand why her son suddenly seems disengaged from American history. I tried to explain that 17 is a complicated age, that sometimes teenagers retreat into themselves while they figure out who they're becoming. But the whole time I was thinking about my own 17-year-old self, about the secrets I was keeping even then, about the ways we learn to hide from ourselves long before we learn to hide from others. Julian has been drinking. Not drunk exactly, but looser than usual, his edges softened by whatever he started before I arrived. There's a bottle of whiskey on the kitchen counter, something expensive with a label I don't recognize, and he pours 2 glasses without asking if I want one. The apartment feels different tonight, charged with something I can't name, like the air before a thunderstorm when your skin prickles with electricity that hasn't found its target yet. We eat dinner by lamplight, some pasta dish he threw together with ingredients that shouldn't work but somehow do, and the conversation meanders through territory we usually avoid. He talks about his marriage, not the careful, surface-level stories he usually tells, but deeper things, harder truths about how 2 people can share a bed for 8 years and still be strangers to each other. He says marriage felt like wearing clothes that were the wrong size, comfortable enough that you don't notice at first, but gradually you realize you can't move the way you need to, can't breathe as deeply as you want to. I listen and drink and try not to think about how his words apply to my own life, my own marriage, my own sense of wearing an identity that fits well enough from the outside but chafes in places I can't discuss with anyone. The whiskey makes everything feel more honest and more dangerous, like we're speaking a language we've both been learning in secret for 20 years. Julian refills our glasses, and we move to the couch, the same place where I watched him sleep that night a few weeks ago, where I first admitted to myself that what I was feeling had moved beyond the safe boundaries of friendship. Tonight, the space between us feels smaller, more charged, like we're both aware of something hovering just outside the range of what we're willing to say aloud. He tells me about Portland, about the job he left, and the woman he almost moved in with before he realized he was just postponing some inevitable reckoning with himself. He says he's never been good at relationships, that there's something fundamentally broken in the way he connects with people or fails to connect. His voice carries a particular kind of loneliness, the kind that comes not from being alone, but from being misunderstood by everyone who tries to get close. The conversation circles closer to something neither of us is quite ready to name. Julian talks about college, about how young we were, how certain we seemed about everything, and how wrong we turned out to be about most of it. He says he's been thinking about that time lately, about the friendships that felt more real than anything he's experienced since, about the way some connections transcend the usual categories. This is when the air in the room shifts, becomes thicker, harder to breathe. Julian sets down his glass and turns toward me on the couch, close enough that I can see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes, close enough that the whiskey on his breath mingles with mine in the small space between us. He says he doesn't do labels, never has, thinks they're too limiting for the way people actually are, the way feelings actually work. But he admits something else, something that makes my chest tighten with panic and recognition, and a longing so sharp it feels like physical pain. He says he's never felt as comfortable with anyone as he does with me, never felt as seen or understood or accepted for the complicated mess he actually is rather than the simplified version he presents to the world. His words hang in the air between us, and I know we've crossed some invisible line, moved into territory where the things we say can't be unsaid, where the pretense of simple friendship becomes impossible to maintain. I should say something, should deflect or joke or change the subject, should do anything other than sit here staring at his mouth and thinking about 20 years of wanting something I convinced myself I couldn't have. Julian reaches out, his hand settling on my knee with the kind of casual intimacy that feels anything but casual, and says my name like he's testing how it sounds in this new context, this charged space we've created. His thumb moves in a small circle against the fabric of my jeans, and the simple touch sends something electric racing through my entire nervous system. I don't remember deciding to kiss him. One moment we're sitting on opposite ends of the couch, talking in careful half-truths about connection and loneliness and the inadequacy of labels, and the next moment I'm leaning toward him, closing the distance between us with the kind of desperate certainty that feels like falling off a cliff. The kiss is tentative at first, a question more than a statement, gentle and terrified and loaded with 20 years of unspoken want. His lips are softer than I imagined, warmer, and they taste like whiskey and possibility and everything I've been trying not to admit I needed. For a moment, just a moment, the world condenses to this single point of contact, this simple truth that cuts through all the complicated machinery of denial I've constructed around my heart. Then reality crashes back with the force of a physical blow. I pull away so quickly I almost fall off the couch, my heart hammering against my ribs, my hands shaking with adrenaline and terror, and something that might be joy if I weren't so afraid of it. Julian's eyes are wide, startled, his hand still extended toward the space where I was sitting a moment before. The silence stretches between us, loaded with everything we can't take back, everything that's changed in the space of a single kiss. I stand up without knowing what I'm going to do, mumble something about getting late, about needing to get home, about Clara worrying if I'm not back soon. The words feel foreign in my mouth, like I'm speaking a language I've forgotten how to use properly. Julian doesn't try to stop me, doesn't say anything at all, just watches as I gather my jacket and keys with movements that feel disconnected from my conscious mind. I can feel his eyes on me as I move toward the door, but I can't look back, can't risk seeing whatever expression is on his face, can't handle whatever words he might say that could make this moment more real or more devastating than it already is. I drive home through empty streets, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ache, trying to process what just happened, trying to understand how a single moment can rewrite the entire story you've been telling yourself about your life. The kiss plays on repeat in my memory, the texture of his lips, the way his breath caught when I leaned toward him, the terrible rightness of it that makes everything else feel like an elaborate performance. At home, the house is dark and quiet, Clara already asleep upstairs. I stand in the bathroom, staring at my reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror, and barely recognize the man looking back at me. This is what truth looks like, I realize. This is what happens when you stop pretending, even for a moment, even accidentally. My lips still feel different, like they're holding the memory of his kiss, like they're refusing to forget what it felt like to be honest about what they wanted. The kiss is both a betrayal and a revelation, both the worst thing I've ever done and the most real I've felt in 20 years of marriage. I brush my teeth with mechanical precision, trying to wash away the taste of whiskey and possibility, but knowing that no amount of denial will erase what happened tonight, will return me to the comfortable ignorance I've been living in for so long. For the first time in my life, I felt the terrifying relief of being honest, if only for a fleeting moment. And standing here in my own bathroom, in my own house, beside my own sleeping wife, I finally understand that everything has to change now, one way or another. The door I thought I'd locked forever has been torn off its hinges, and there's no going back to pretending it was never there. The days after the kiss stretch like a held breath. I don't call Julian, don't text, don't show up for our usual Tuesday evening. Instead, I throw myself into the careful performance of being a husband and father with desperate precision, as if perfect execution of the role might somehow erase what happened in his apartment, might restore the comfortable numbness I'd been living in for 20 years. I help Emma with her college applications, sitting at the kitchen table surrounded by forms and essays about her dreams for the future. She wants to study environmental science, to save the world in ways my generation failed to do, and her passion is so pure, so uncomplicated, that it makes my chest ache with something that might be envy. When she asks me to read her personal statement about finding your authentic path even when it's not the expected one, I have to excuse myself to the bathroom, overcome by the irony of a 17-year-old teaching her father about courage. Clara notices, of course. She's always been perceptive about the subtle weather of our marriage, attuned to shifts in my mood that I think I'm hiding successfully. Over dinner on Wednesday, she mentions that I seem tense, distracted. She asks if I'm feeling all right, if there's trouble at work, if the parent conferences are wearing on me more than usual this year. Her concern is genuine, loving, and it makes the guilt sit heavier in my chest, a physical weight that makes it hard to breathe properly. I tell her I'm fine, just tired, maybe coming down with something. The lie feels familiar by now, comfortable as an old sweater, but it also feels more dangerous somehow, like each repetition is adding weight to a structure that can't hold much more before it collapses entirely. But I'm not fine. I'm consumed by the memory of Julian's kiss, by the way his lips felt against mine, by the terrible rightness of a moment that's supposed to be wrong. I catch myself reliving it at inappropriate times, during faculty meetings, while teaching about the Declaration of Independence, while Clara talks about her day at the insurance office. The kiss has lodged itself in my consciousness like a splinter, impossible to ignore, impossible to extract. Julian starts calling on Thursday. I let it go to voicemail, then delete the message without listening. He texts Friday morning, just my name followed by a question mark, and I stare at the screen for 10 minutes before putting the phone away without responding. By Sunday, the messages have become more insistent. We need to talk, he writes. I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. You can't just disappear. He's right, of course, but disappearing feels like my only option, the only way to contain the damage, to keep the kiss from spreading into the rest of my life like some kind of infection. I tell myself that if I can just hold on long enough, the intensity will fade, the memory will lose its power, and I can return to the careful equilibrium I'd maintained before he moved back to town. But Julian doesn't let me retreat gracefully. On Tuesday evening, When I should be grading papers in the safety of my own house, he shows up at my door. Clara answers, smiles warmly, invites him in for coffee. They make small talk about the apartment, about how he's settling in, about the job interview he had at the community college. She mentions that I've seemed tired lately, stressed about something, and suggests that maybe spending time with an old friend would be good for me. The irony is excruciating. Julian sits at my kitchen table, drinking coffee from one of our wedding china cups, charming my wife with stories about our college days, while I sit frozen in my chair, aware that everything is about to crack open. When Clara excuses herself to help David with his homework, Julian's demeanor shifts, becomes more focused, more intense. He leans across the table, his voice low enough that it won't carry to the next room, and says what I've been dreading to hear. "You can't keep living like this," he tells me. "You can't pretend that what happened didn't happen, that what you felt wasn't real." His eyes are kind but implacable, and I recognize the expression from college, the look he got when he decided something was important enough to fight for. I try to deflect, to make excuses about complicated situations and responsibilities, about how some things are better left alone. But Julian cuts through my rationalizations with the brutal efficiency of someone who's had time to think through every argument I might make. He says he knows this is scary, knows it changes everything, but that living a lie is its own kind of death, and he won't watch me choose that. The conversation is interrupted by Clara's return, and Julian smoothly shifts back to safe topics, but the damage is done. His words echo in my head for the rest of the evening, through dinner and bedtime routines, and the careful choreography of a marriage that suddenly feels like an elaborate stage production. The breaking point comes 3 days later, on a Friday night after Emma and David have gone out with friends, and the house settles into the kind of quiet that used to feel peaceful, but now feels suffocating. Clara and I are cleaning up after dinner, moving around each other in the kitchen with the practiced efficiency of 20 years together, when she stops abruptly, a dish towel in her hands, and looks at me with an expression I've never seen before. "Something is wrong," she says, and it's not a question. Her voice is steady but strained, like she's been practicing this conversation, working up the courage to finally have it. "You've been different for weeks, distant in a way that's not about being tired or stressed at work. You disappear into yourself sometimes, like you're somewhere else entirely, thinking about someone else entirely." The words hang in the air between us, loaded with 20 years of marriage, 20 years of shared history, 20 years of trust that I've been systematically undermining without meaning to. I open my mouth to offer another excuse, another deflection, but Clara raises her hand to stop me. Her next words come out quietly, but they land with the force of a physical blow. "Do you love him?" The question is so direct, so nakedly honest, that it takes my breath away. Not who is he, not what's going on, not are you having an affair. Just the simple, devastating truth of what she's figured out, what she's known on some level longer than I've been willing to admit it to myself. I should answer immediately. I should deny it, should laugh at the absurdity of the suggestion, should do anything other than stand there in my own kitchen, frozen by the terrible accuracy of her question. A loving husband, a faithful husband, would have words ready, would be offended by the implication, would reassure his wife with the kind of immediate certainty that leaves no room for doubt. Instead, I stand there in silence that stretches between us like a chasm, and in that silence Clara finds her answer. Her face changes, hardens and softens at the same time, like she's watching something she hoped she was wrong about but knew in her heart was true. The dish towel falls from her hands to the floor, a small white flag of surrender, and when she looks at me again, her eyes are bright with unshed tears. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of building a life together, and it comes down to this moment, this question, this silence that speaks louder than any words I could have offered. "I love you," I finally managed to say, and it's true, but it's also not enough. Not the whole truth, not the answer to the question she actually asked. Clara nods once, a sharp movement that acknowledges both the truth and the inadequacy of what I've said. "I know you do," she whispers, "but that's not what I asked." And in the quiet that follows, In the space between her question and my inability to answer it the way an innocent man would, we both understand that everything we've built together is about to come apart. Not because we don't love each other, but because love, it turns out, isn't always enough to overcome the weight of living a lie, the exhaustion of being someone you're not, the terrible longing for a truth that will cost you everything you thought you wanted. The wedding ring sits on the kitchen counter beside a half-finished cup of coffee, 20 years of promises reduced to a simple band of gold that catches the morning light and throws it back in fractured pieces. I've been staring at it for 10 minutes. This small circle that once felt like the most important thing in the world, trying to remember the moment I slipped it on Clara's finger and promised to love her until death parted us. I did love her. I still love her. But love, I've learned, can be true and insufficient at the same time. Clara left early, took the kids to her mother's house without explanation, just a quiet conversation in the hallway that I wasn't meant to overhear. Emma asked why they were leaving so suddenly, and Clara's voice was steady when she said sometimes grown-ups need space to figure things out. David, 16 and perpetually distracted, just shrugged and asked if he could bring his PlayStation. The ordinary brutality of it all, the way life-changing moments happen around conversations about video games and overnight bags. The house feels different without them, not empty exactly, but suspended, like a held breath waiting to be released. Every room holds evidence of the life we built together, photographs arranged on surfaces that now feel like exhibits in a museum of something that used to be real. 20 years of accumulated happiness, reduced to artifacts that tell a story I'm no longer sure I understand. I pack slowly, methodically, choosing only what feels essential. A few changes of clothes, books I can't imagine living without, the watch my father gave me when I graduated college. Everything else belongs to this version of myself that I'm preparing to leave behind. This careful construction of respectability that took decades to build and will be dismantled by a single choice. The hardest part is standing in the doorway of Emma and David's rooms, looking at spaces that hold so much of who they are, who they're becoming. Emma's walls covered with environmental posters and college brochures, her acceptance letters arranged on her desk like promises of a future I might not be part of the same way. David's room cluttered with the debris of adolescence, video games and textbooks, and the guitar he's been teaching himself to play, filling the house with tentative melodies that speak of possibilities he's just beginning to discover. I love them with an intensity that makes my chest ache, and I know that choosing truth will cost me the daily privilege of being their father, will reduce me to weekend visits and awkward dinners and the complicated geography of a family divided by divorce. But I also know that staying would be its own betrayal, teaching them through example that love means living a lie, that authenticity is less important than appearance, that you can sacrifice the essential parts of yourself for the sake of keeping others comfortable. The phone has been ringing all morning. Julian, probably, or maybe Clara calling from her mother's house to discuss logistics, the practical machinery of dissolution. I let it ring. There will be time later for conversations about custody and property division, for lawyers and mediation, and all the administrative details of unmaking a life. Right now, I need to focus on the simple act of choosing, of finally answering the question Clara asked in the kitchen with actions instead of the silence that said everything she needed to know. I write a letter, longhand on paper from the notepad we keep by the kitchen phone. 3 pages of inadequate words trying to explain 20 years of good intentions and gradual self-deception, trying to make sense of how a man can love his family and still need to leave them, trying to apologize for the pain I'm about to cause without asking for forgiveness I don't deserve. I seal it in an envelope with Clara's name written carefully across the front, my handwriting looking strange and formal, like a signature on a document that changes everything. The suitcase sits by the front door, smaller than I expected, containing so little of what I thought defined me. Outside, autumn has settled over the neighborhood with the particular melancholy of October, leaves scattered across the street in patterns that look random but follow the invisible logic of wind and gravity. The trees are mostly bare now, their summer fullness reduced to skeleton branches that reach toward a gray sky, like prayers spoken in a language I'm only beginning to learn. Julian's car idles at the curb, exhaust visible in the cold air, and through the windshield I can see him waiting with the kind of patience that speaks to deeper understanding. He doesn't honk or get out or make any gesture that might hurry me along. He just waits, because he knows that this moment belongs to me alone, this final choice between the life I built and the life I might have if I'm brave enough to claim it. My hands shake as I pick up the suitcase, muscle memory of 20 years of routine protesting this departure from everything familiar and safe. But then I think about the kiss in Julian's apartment, about the terrible relief of being honest for just a moment, about the weight of living a truth that costs everything and offers no guarantees except the possibility of becoming who I actually am instead of who I thought I was supposed to be. My hand steady. The trembling stops, replaced by something that might be resolve or might be surrender, the recognition that some choices can only be made once and remake you entirely in the making. I open the door and step into the October air, autumn leaves crunching under my feet as I walk toward Julian's car, toward uncertainty, toward the fragile hope that authenticity might be worth the price it demands. No music swells. No promises are spoken. There's just the sound of a car door closing, the engine shifting into drive, and the quiet of a man who has finally chosen truth over safety, who has decided that being real is worth more than being comfortable, even when the cost is everything he thought he wanted. The house grows smaller in the side mirror, and with it the version of myself I'm leaving behind. 20 years of careful construction reduced to a story I will tell differently now. A life I will remember with love and regret in equal measure. Ahead lies nothing but possibility and the terrible freedom of starting over at 40, of building something new on the foundation of finally knowing who I am.